Welcome to chapter 17 on locomotion and movement. Basically, movement is one of the most significant features of all living beings. See, when we talk about movement, we are referring to so many different forms. You have the streaming of protoplasm in a simple organism like amoeba, isn't it? Very basic movement. Then you have organisms that show movement of cilia, flagella, and tentacles. And of course, we humans, we can move our limbs, jaws, eyelids, tongue, row mainly combs the body. So movement takes many forms. Now when a movement results in a change of place or location, we call that locomotion. Think about it. When you walk from your classroom to the library, that is locomotion. When a bird flies from one tree to another tree, that is locomotion. Walking, running, climbing, flying, swimming, all these are forms of locomotory movements. So locomotion is specifically about movement that takes you from one place to another place. Here is something interesting. These structures used for locomotion are often the same structures used for other types of movement. Take paramecium, for example. The cilia, the same cilia that help move food through the cytopharynx, those same cilia also help in locomotion. Or look at Hydra, the tentacles, they use them to capture prey, but they also use those same tentacles for moving around for locomotion. Even in humans, our limb cilia martinis, we use them to change our body postures, but we also use them for walking and locomotion. So you see, the structures can have multiple functions. This teaches us an important idea. All locomotions are movements, but all movements are not locomotions. Clear now? Why do animals move? Why is locomotion so important? Well, the reasons are many, and they vary depending on the situation and the habitat. First, animals move to search for food. A tiger moves through the forest looking for prey. A bird flies looking for seeds. We go to the market looking for groceries. Second reason, animals need to find shelter. They need safe places to live. Third reason, animals move to find mates. During breeding season, many animals travel significant distances to find partners. Fourth reason, they search for appropriate breeding grounds, places where they can have their babies safely. Fifth reason, animals move to find favorable climatic conditions. Migratory birds, they fly thousands of kilometers to escape harsh winters and find warmer places. Finally, and very importantly, animals move to escape from enemies and predators. The prey animals run away to save their lives. So you see, locomotion is driven by survival and reproduction needs. And the methods of locomotion, they vary greatly depending on the habitat. A fish swims in water, a bird flies in air, a cheetah runs on land. Each animal has developed locomotory methods suited to where it lives. One very important point, to understand the structures used for locomotion are often the same structures used for other types of movements and functions. Let me give you clear examples. Take paramecium, a single-celled organism. The cilia, these hair-like structures, they have two jobs. First job, they move food particles through the cytopharynx, which is the feeding tube. Second job, these same cilia help the entire organism move around. Two different functions, one same structure. Look at Hydra, a simple animal from the sea. It has tentacles. What are these tentacles for? They capture prey, the food items. But Hydra also uses these same tentacles to move around, to locomote from one place to another. In humans, our limbs, we change our body postures using them. We bend down, we stretch up, but we also use these same limbs to walk, to run, to jump. So the conclusion is clear, the structures used in locomotion are not necessarily different from structures used in other movements. This is why scientists say that movements and locomotion cannot be studied completely separately. They are linked together. All locomotions are movements, but remember, all movements are not locomotions. The cells in our human body exhibit three main types of movements. First one is amoeboid movement. This type of movement is seen in certain specialized cells like macrophages and leukocytes, which are white blood cells. How does amoeboid movement work? It works through pseudopodia ammodoids. These are temporary projections of the cell. The cytoplasm streams into these projections, enabling the cell to move, similar to how an amoeba moves. Although these are cells within our body, the cell basically changes shape and flows, one part flowing forward while other parts follow. The second type is ciliary movement. This happens in many of our internal organs that have tube-like structures. These organs are lined with ciliated epithelium, meaning the cells have cilia, those hair-like structures. How do cilia work? They move in a coordinated manner, beating back and forth. In your trachea, in your windpipe, coordinated ciliary movements help remove dust particles and other foreign substances that you inhale with air. Very important for keeping our airways clean. Similarly, in the female reproductive system, ciliary movement helps the egg cell, the ovum, pass through the reproductive tract. The third type is muscular movement. This is the type you're most familiar with. Movement of our limbs, our jaws, our tongue, all involve muscular movement. Muscular movement is based on the contractile property of muscles, their ability to contract and shorten. We use muscular movement for locomotion when we walk and run. We use it for other movements, also changing our postures. Muscular movement requires very precise coordination. You need your muscular system, your skeletal system, and your nervous system all working together in perfect harmony. This is the main topic we will study in detail. Now let's look at muscles in detail. Muscle is a specialized tissue. It originates from mesoderm, which is one of the embryonic tissue layers. An interesting fact, in an adult human, muscle tissue makes up between 40 to 50% of total body weight. Think about that. Almost half your body is muscle. Muscles have some very special properties. First property, excitability. Muscles can respond to stimuli, especially electrical signals from nerves. Second property, contractility. Muscles can contract, they can shorten. This is their main job. Third property, extensibility. Muscles can be stretched, they can extend. And fourth property, elasticity. After being stretched, muscles can return to their original length. These four properties together make muscles perfect for their function. Now, muscles are not all the same. We classify them using three different criteria. First, criterion location, where they are in the body. Second, criterion time, appearance, how they look under the microscope. Third, criterion the nature of their control, whether they are voluntary or involuntary. Based on these criteria, we identify three main types of muscles. First type, skeletal muscles. Second type, visceral muscles. And third type, cardiac muscles. Each type has its own characteristics and its own functions. Let's look at each one. Let's understand skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles are closely connected with our skeletal bones. You can see under a microscope that they have a striped or striated appearance, hence they are called striated muscles. The important thing about skeletal muscles is that they are under your conscious control. When you want to move your arm, you can move it. When you want to stand up, you can stand up. This voluntary control is why they are called voluntary muscles. Skeletal muscles are mainly involved in two things. First, locomotory actions, meaning moving your body from one place to another. And second, changes in body postures like bending down or stretching up. Your biceps muscle, your quadriceps muscle, your gastrocnemius muscle, all these are skeletal muscles involved in movement. The second type of muscle is visceral muscle, also called smooth muscle. Where are these muscles located? They are in the walls of our hollow internal organs. You find them in the alimentary canal, that's your digestive system, in your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. You find them in the reproductive tract as well. When you look at these muscles under the microscope, they appear smooth, no stripes, no striations. That is why they are called smooth muscles or non-striated muscles. And here is the key difference from skeletal muscles. Visceral muscles are involuntary. You cannot consciously control them. Your stomach keeps working even when you are sleeping, isn't it? You cannot tell your digestive system to stop digesting food. What are the functions of visceral muscles? They help transport food through your digestive tract. Peristalsis, the wave-like movement that pushes food down your esophagus, that is due to visceral muscle contractions. In the reproductive system, gametes, the sperm and the egg, They are transported through the genital tract by these visceral muscles. So basically, visceral muscles are responsible for moving materials and substances through our internal passages. The control is automatic, handled by the autonomic nervous system. The third type is cardiac muscle. As the name suggests, these are the muscles of your heart. Cardiac muscle cells have an interesting structure. Many individual cardiac muscle cells come together and assemble in a branching pattern, creating a network. Under the microscope, cardiac muscle appears striated, similar to skeletal muscle, so they have stripes. However, unlike skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles are involuntary. You cannot tell your heart to beat faster or slower just by thinking about it. Your heart just keeps beating on its own, controlled by your autonomic nervous system. Your heart beats even when you are sleeping, continuously pumping blood throughout your body. This combination of striated appearance and involuntary control makes cardiac muscle unique. Now, let's look at the detailed structure of skeletal muscle. Muscles have a hierarchical organization. Start with the whole muscle. The whole muscle is made up of many muscle bundles, also called fascicles. These bundles are held together by a connective tissue layer called fascia. The fascia is made of collagen fibers and provides structural support. Each muscle bundle contains many muscle fibers. Now, what is a muscle fiber? A muscle fiber is essentially a muscle cell. Each muscle fiber is lined by a plasma membrane called sarcolemma. This membrane has special properties to handle muscle contraction. Inside the sarcolemma is the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm of the muscle cell, but specialized for muscle function. The sarcoplasm contains contractile proteins and various organelles. An interesting fact about muscle fibers, they are syncytia. What does this mean? It means they contain many nuclei. A typical muscle fiber has many nuclei, not just one. This is because during muscle development, multiple small cells fuse together to form one large muscle fiber. So one muscle fiber is really the fusion product of many cells. That is why you get multiple nuclei. Another very important structure in the sarcoplasm is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is a specialized form of endoplasmic reticulum. What is its job? It stores calcium ions. This calcium is crucial for muscle contraction. When a muscle receives a signal to contract, calcium is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the sarcoplasm. We will learn more about this later. Inside the sarcoplasm of a muscle fiber, you find a large number of filaments arranged parallel to each other. These are called myofilaments or myofibrils. When you look at a myofibril under the microscope, you see alternating dark and light bands. Why does this pattern exist? It is because of the specific arrangement of two important proteins, actin and myosin. Actin forms thin filaments and myosin forms thick filaments. These filaments are arranged in a very specific pattern, and that pattern creates the alternating dark and light bands you see. This arrangement is not random. It is precisely organized. This precise organization is what gives skeletal muscle its striated appearance. The light bands are called I bands, I for isotropic. These bands contain actin filaments. The dark bands are called A bands, A for anisotropic. These bands contain myosin filaments. Both actin and myosin are arranged as rod-like structures, parallel to each other and parallel to the long axis of the myofibril. Now, size-wise, actin filaments are thinner compared to myosin filaments. So, actin is called thin filament and myosin is called thick filament. In muscle physiology, you will always hear thin filament and thick filament when talking about actin and myosin respectively. First, remember this terminology. The light bands are called I bands, I for isotropic. These bands contain actin filaments. The dark bands are called A bands, A for anisotropic. These bands contain myosin filaments. Both actin and myosin are arranged as rod-like structures parallel to each other and parallel to the long axis of the myofibril. Now, size-wise, actin filaments are thinner compared to myosin filaments. So, actin is called thin filament and myosin is called thick filament. In muscle physiology, you will always hear thin filament and thick filament when talking about actin and myosin respectively. Remember this terminology. Now, at the center of each I band, there is an elastic fiber called the Zell line. This Zell line bisects the I band, meaning it cuts it right in the middle. The thin actin filaments are firmly attached to this Z line. In the A band, in the middle, there is another thin fibrous membrane called the M line. The M line holds the thick myosin filaments together. So you have Z lines separating the I bands and M lines organizing the A bands. And this pattern of A band, then I band, then A band, then I band repeats throughout the length of the myofibril. This repetitive organization is the key to how muscles contract. Now, here is a very important concept. The portion of a myofibril between two successive Z lines is called a sarcomere. The sarcomere is the functional unit of muscle contraction. When a muscle contracts, it contracts sarcomere by sarcomere. Many sarcomeres contracting together produce the overall muscle contraction. In the resting state, what is the arrangement? The thin filaments, they partially overlap the free ends of the thick filaments. Basically, the thin filaments extend partially over the thick filaments. But the central part of the thick filament, it has no thin filaments covering it. This central uncovered part is called the H zone. H stands for Helix, which means clear or empty. You can see it clearly in electron microscope images because it has no thin filaments there. The thin filament, made primarily of actin, has a specific structure. It consists of two F-actins wound helically around each other, like two twisted strands. Each F-actin is made by linking together smaller globular actin molecules called G-actins. So many G-actins linked together form F-actin, and two F-actins twisted together form the thin filament. Now, running along the grooves of these F-actins, you have tropomyosin filaments. Tropomyosin is a long, slender protein. At regular intervals along tropomyosin, there is another protein called troponin. Troponin is a complex protein with multiple subunits. The arrangement of tropomyosin and troponin along the actin filament is very important for muscle regulation. In resting muscle, when the muscle is not contracting, what happens? A specific subunit of troponin covers or masks the active binding sites for myosin on the actin filament. Think of it like locks on a door. The myosin heads cannot access these sites. The tropomyosin also helps block this access. This masking or blocking mechanism is very important because it prevents the muscle from contracting when it should not contract. The muscle can only contract when this block is removed. How is this block removed? That is where calcium enters the picture. When calcium binds to troponin, it causes a conformational change in shape, a change in shape that moves tropomyosin aside and exposes the myosin binding sites. This is the start of muscle contraction. The thick filament is made of a protein called myosin. Myosin molecules are linked together to form the thick filament, making it a polymerized protein structure. Each individual myosin molecule is called a meromyosin. Now, structurally, each meromyosin has two main parts. The first part is heavy meromyosin, abbreviated LMM. LMM is the tail region. The HMM portions, the heads and arms, they project outward from the thick filament at regular distances and angles. These projections are called cross arms or cross bridges when they connect with actin. The myosin head. This globular head portion is very special. It has ATPase activity. What does this mean? It means it can break down ATP molecules and release energy. The myosin head has specific binding sites where ATP molecules can attach. It also has active sites where it can bind to actin filaments. So during muscle contraction, the myosin head binds to actin, then ATP hydrolysis provides the energy for the power stroke. This is the basic mechanism of how muscles convert chemical energy into mechanical movement. The myosin head is, in essence, a molecular motor powered by ATP hydrolysis. One of the most important concepts in muscle physiology is the sliding filament theory. This theory explains how muscles actually contract at the molecular level. What does the theory say? It says that muscle contraction happens because the thin filaments slide over the thick filaments. Think of it like two cars moving past each other on a highway. The thin filaments move, the thick filaments stay more or less in place, and they slide past each other. Now, here is the key point. The filaments themselves do not get shorter. The actin molecules do not shrink. The myosin molecules do not compress. Rather, they slide. And because they slide, the distance between the Z lines decreases, which means the sarcomere shortens. And that is what we call contraction. Now let's go through the actual steps of how a muscle contracts. Step 1. The central nervous system, the CNS, sends a signal. This signal travels along a motor neuron. What is a motor neuron? It is a nerve cell whose job is to carry commands from the CNS to the muscles. A motor neuron connects to multiple muscle fibers. One motor neuron plus all the muscle fibers it connects to. This combination is called a motor unit. When the CNS sends a signal along the motor neuron, all the muscle fibers in that motor unit receive the signal. This is how the CNS orchestrates muscle contraction. Different motor units can fire independently, giving the CNS fine control over which muscles contract and when. Step 2. The neural signal reaches the neuromuscular junction. What is the neuromuscular junction? It is the connection point between the motor neuron and the muscle fiber. It is also called the motor end plate. This is a specialized structure. The motor neuron approaches the muscle fiber and forms a junction with it. When the neural signal reaches this junction, something important happens. The neuron releases a chemical messenger called acetylcholine. This is a neurotransmitter. The acetylcholine crosses the small gap, called the synaptic cleft, between the motor neuron and the muscle fiber membrane. Acetylcholine then binds to specific receptors on the muscle fiber membrane, the sarcolemma. This binding generates an action potential. What is an action potential? It is a sudden change in electrical potential across the membrane, a depolarization. This action potential spreads along the surface of the muscle fiber. It also penetrates deep into the fiber through structures called T-tubules, bringing the electrical signal to the interior of the fiber. This is important because the calcium that triggers contraction is stored deep inside the fiber. The electrical signal needs to reach the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is where the calcium is stored. Step 3. The action potential spreading through the muscle fiber causes calcium ions to be released into the sarcoplasm. Where does this calcium come from? From the sarcoplasmic reticulum, remember? This is the specialized calcium storage organelle inside the fiber. When the electrical signal reaches the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it triggers the opening of calcium channels. Calcium ions rush out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum and flood into the sarcoplasm. In resting muscle, calcium concentration is very low, but when the signal arrives, calcium concentration increases dramatically, many times over. This increase in calcium concentration is the key signal that initiates muscle contraction. Without this rise in calcium, the contraction process cannot start. Step 4. Here is where calcium does its job. The calcium ions bind to a subunit of troponin. Troponin, remember, is the regulatory protein sitting on the actin filament. When calcium binds to troponin, it causes a conformational change, a change in the shape of troponin. This shape change moves tropomyosin, which had been blocking the myosin binding sites. With tropomyosin moved aside, the active binding sites for myosin are now exposed. The sites that were previously masked or hidden are now accessible. The myosin heads can now potentially bind to these sites. This is the critical step that unlocks the muscle contraction machinery. Without calcium binding to troponin, these sites remain blocked and contraction cannot happen. Step 5. Now, the myosin head binds to the exposed active site on actin. This binding creates a link between the thick filament and the thin filament. This link is called a cross bridge. The energy for this process comes from ATP hydrolysis. Remember we said myosin has ATPase activity? Well, myosin hydrolyzes ATP, splitting it into ADP and phosphate. The energy released in this process powers the next event. The energy drives a conformational change in the myosin head. The myosin head pivots, bending at the neck region. This bending pulls the attached actin filament. The actin filament is pulled toward the center of the A band. Remember, the Z lines are attached to the actin filaments. When the actin filaments are pulled inward, the Z lines are also pulled inward. When the Z lines move closer together, the distance between them decreases. The sarcomere shortens, contraction. This pulling motion of the myosin head is called the power stroke. It is the actual mechanical work that shortens the sarcomere. Many sarcomeres shortening together result in the whole muscle getting shorter. Step 6. After the power stroke, the myosin head is still attached to actin, but it needs to detach so that it can pull again at the next actin site. How does detachment happen? After the power stroke, the myosin head has released the ADP and phosphate that were left over from the previous ATP hydrolysis. It returns to a relaxed state. Then, a new ATP molecule binds to the myosin head. When ATP binds, the affinity of myosin for actin decreases dramatically. The myosin head releases from the actin molecule. The cross bridge is broken. The muscle needs energy ATP Mitch note not just for contraction but also for relaxation and detachment. Now the new ATP that bound to myosin is itself hydrolyzed. ATP is split into ADP and phosphate and energy is released. This energy re-energizes the myosin head, putting it back into the high energy state. The myosin head is now ready to bind again at the next site along the actin filament. This whole cycle repeats. Cross bridge forms, power stroke happens, cross bridge breaks, new ATP binds, ATP is hydrolyzed, myosin head re-energizes. Then the cycle repeats with the myosin head binding at the next site. Each cycle pulls the thin filament further. Many cycles happening simultaneously result in continuous sliding and sustained contraction. This process, this cycling, continues as long as two conditions are met. First condition, calcium, must remain elevated in the sarcoplasm. The action potential has spread, the signal has come, calcium was released. As long as calcium remains high, the process continues. Second condition, ATP must be available. Muscles require constant supply of ATP during contraction. If either calcium drops or ATP runs out, the process stops. The cycling continues, pulling the thin filaments further and further, resulting in sustained contraction of the muscle. As muscle contraction happens, we can observe specific changes in the band pattern under the microscope. Let me tell you what happens. The eye bands become narrower, they get reduced. Why? Because the thin filaments are sliding over the thick filaments. The area that contains only thin filaments becomes smaller. The thin filaments are overlapping more with the thick filaments. Now here is the most important observation. The A bands remain the same width. They do not get narrower or wider. They retain their length. This is absolutely crucial evidence for the sliding filament theory. Why does A band not change? Because the A band represents the length of the thick filament. The thick filament does not shorten, it does not get compressed. Only the thin filaments slide over it. So the A band length stays constant. This observation eliminates any theory that says the thick and thin filaments themselves shorten. That does not happen. What about the eighth zone? The eighth zone is the central part of the A band, where only thick filaments are present, no thin filaments. During contraction, thin filaments slide into this zone, so the eighth zone becomes narrower. At maximum contraction, the thin filaments may slide so far that the eighth zone completely disappears. Finally, the Z lines move closer together. The distance between Z lines decreases. That is the sarcomere shortening. These observable changes, reduced I bands, constant A bands, reduced eighth zone, closer Z lines, they all match exactly what the sliding filament theory predicts. Now relaxation. When the muscle signal stops, when the action potential ceases, relaxation begins. The key to relaxation is removing calcium from the sarcoplasm. Special pumps, called calcium ATPase pumps, start working. These pumps actively transport calcium ions from the sarcoplasm back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is active transport. It requires ATP energy. As calcium is pumped back, the calcium concentration in the sarcoplasm drops significantly. When calcium concentration decreases, calcium ions dissociate from troponin. Troponin returns to its original shape. When troponin changes back to its original shape, it causes tropomyosin to slide back to its original position. The myosin binding sites on actin are now blocked again, just like they were at rest. New cross bridges cannot form. The existing cross bridges break when new ATP molecules bind to myosin heads. Remember, ATP binding causes myosin to release from actin. With no new cross bridges forming and existing ones breaking, the thin filaments are no longer being pulled toward the center. The elastic properties of the muscle tissue allow the sarcomeres to passively stretch back toward their original length. The Z lines return to their original positions, the muscle relaxes. Here is an important point. Relaxation requires ATP. It is not just the absence of contraction. It is an active process that requires energy. If ATP is not available, muscles cannot relax. After an organism dies, ATP production stops. Without ATP, the cross bridges cannot break. The muscles become stuck in a contracted state. This is called rigor mortis, the stiffening of muscles after death. The muscles become rigid and cannot be moved. This demonstrates clearly that both contraction and relaxation require energy. Different muscles respond at different speeds. The reaction times, the time between when a stimulus is received and when contraction begins, varies among muscles. Some muscles react very quickly, others more slowly. This is due to differences in how quickly calcium is released, how fast cross bridges cycle, and the mechanical properties of the muscle. This variation in reaction time is actually beneficial. It means different muscles are adapted for different speeds of activity. Now, fatigue. Muscle fatigue is the temporary loss of muscle strength and contractile capacity. It happens when muscles are used repeatedly or intensely. What causes fatigue? A major cause is accumulation of metabolic waste products. During intense exercise, muscles cannot get enough oxygen. They switch to anaerobic metabolism, breaking down glycogen without oxygen. This produces ATP for energy, but it also produces lactic acid as a byproduct. Lactic acid accumulates in the muscle. The lactic acid accumulation and the resulting acidosis, increased acidity in the muscle, interferes with cross-bridge cycling and force generation. The acidic environment disrupts the normal function of contractile proteins. That is why fatigued muscles produce less force. But here is the good news: fatigue is reversible. When muscles rest, the lactic acid is cleared, the acidosis is resolved, and muscles recover their function. That is why rest is important between intense activities. Muscles are not all the same. There are two main types of muscle fibers, red fibers and white fibers. Red fibers are called red because they contain a lot of a protein called myoglobin. Myoglobin is red colored. It stores oxygen. In red fibers, myoglobin content is high, so they appear reddish. Red fibers also contain plenty of mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, the site of aerobic respiration. With all these mitochondria, red fibers can use a lot of oxygen for producing ATP. Red fibers are called aerobic muscles because they use aerobic metabolism. They can sustain contractions for a long time without getting fatigued. They are used for sustained activities. Postural muscles, which keep your body upright all day, are mostly red fibers. Marathon runners' leg muscles have high proportion of red fibers because they need sustained contraction for long distances. Now, white fibers. White fibers have very little myoglobin, so they appear pale or whitish. They have relatively few mitochondria because they do not rely as much on aerobic metabolism, but they have a high amount of sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is important for rapid calcium release and reuptake, allowing fast contractions. White fibers depend on anaerobic metabolism for energy. White fibers can contract very rapidly and generate a lot of force, but they fatigue quickly because they depend on anaerobic metabolism, which produces lactic acid, so they cannot sustain contraction for long. They are used for brief, intense activities. Sprinting requires white fibers. Weightlifting requires white fibers. Jumping requires white fibers. Most muscles in your body contain a mixture of both red and white fibers. The ratio depends on the function of the muscle. Endurance-trained athletes can increase their proportion of red fibers through training. The skeletal system is the framework of your body. It is made of bones and cartilages. The skeleton has a very important role in movement. Without bones, you cannot have stable locomotion. Both bone and cartilage are specialized connective tissues. Bone has a very hard matrix because of calcium salts deposited in it. This makes bone rigid and strong, providing strong support. Cartilage has a slightly pliable or flexible matrix because of chondroitin salts. This makes cartilage flexible, allowing some bending without breaking. Different parts of the skeleton require different properties, flexibility in some places, rigidity in others. The human skeleton contains 206 bones in an adult plus several cartilages. These are grouped into two main divisions. First division, axial skeleton. This contains 80 bones and includes the skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs. The axial skeleton forms the central axis of the body. Second division, appendicular skeleton. This contains the remaining bones, approximately 126 bones plus the limb girdles. The appendicular skeleton includes the bones of the limbs and the girdles that attach them to the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton provides support for the central body axis, while the appendicular skeleton provides support for the limbs. Let's look at the skull. The skull is made of two types of bones. First type, cranial bones. There are 8 cranial bones. Their job is to form a protective vault, a hard protective covering for your brain. Altogether, these 8 cranial bones form what is called the cranium. The cranium is rigid and strong, protecting your brain from injury. The cranial bones are joined together with immovable joints called sutures. The sutures prevent any movement while creating a unified protective structure. The second type, facial bones. There are 14 skeletal elements in the facial region. They form the front part of your skull. Important bones include the maxillae, which form the upper jaw, then the mandible, the lower jaw oesophagus, and notice the mandible is the only bone in the skull that moves. It articulates with the temporal bone, allowing you to open and close your mouth. Then you have the zygomatic bones, your cheekbones. Various other facial bones support your face structure. At the base of the skull, there are 2 rounded projections called occipital condyles. These articulate with the first cervical vertebra, the atlas, allowing head movement. The skull is called decondylic because it has 2 condyles. At the base of your buccal cavity, the oral cavity, there is a single U-shaped bone called the hyoid. The hyoid supports your tongue and provides attachment for neck muscles. Finally, in the middle ear, there are 3 tiny bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. These are the smallest bones in your body. They transmit sound vibrations from the eardrum to the inner ear, allowing you to hear. The vertebral column or spine is made of 26 vertebrae arranged one on top of another. These vertebrae are positioned along the back of your body. The vertebral column extends from the base of your skull all the way down, and it forms the main support framework for your trunk. Each individual vertebra has a special feature, a hollow opening in the center called the neural canal. The spinal cord passes through these neural canals. This arrangement protects the spinal cord from injury, keeping it safe inside the bone. The first vertebra is special. It is called the atlas. The atlas articulates with the occipital condyles of the skull, supporting your head. The vertebral column is divided into 5 regions, each with different characteristics. Starting from the top, cervical region has 7 vertebrae in your neck. 7 cervical vertebrae? This is found in almost all mammals, by the way. Thoracic region has 12 vertebrae in your mid-back. These have special articulation surfaces for the ribs. Lumbar region has 5 vertebrae in your lower back. These are large and sturdy. Then sacral region 5 fused vertebrae forming the sacrum. Finally, coccygeal region bedistly, the tailbone, 1 or a few fused vertebrae. What are the functions of the vertebral column? First, it protects the spinal cord. The cord is enclosed safely within the neural canals. Second, it supports your head. Your head weighs several kilograms and the vertebral column bears this weight. Third, it serves as an attachment point for ribs and the muscles of the back. Fourth, it provides structural integrity to your trunk, keeping it stable and upright. The thoracic cage, the rib cage, is formed by ribs, sternum, and thoracic vertebrae. The sternum is a flat bone on the front of your chest. It provides the anterior connection point for ribs. You have 12 pairs of ribs, that is 24 individual ribs. Each rib is a thin, flat bone. Dorsally, each rib connects to the thoracic vertebrae of the vertebral column. Ventrally, each rib connects to the sternum on the front. Each rib has two articulation surfaces at its dorsal end now. One connects to the vertebral body, one to the transverse process. This is why ribs are called bicephalic. They have two heads or connection points. Now, the ribs are classified into three types based on how they connect ventrally. The first 7 pairs are called true ribs. True ribs are attached dorsally to the thoracic vertebrae and ventrally connected directly to the sternum. The connection to the sternum is made through hyaline cartilage, which is flexible. This flexibility allows the rib cage to move during breathing, expanding when you inhale, contracting when you exhale. The 8th, 9th, and 10th pairs are called false ribs or vertebrochondral ribs. False ribs do not attach directly to the sternum. Instead, they connect to the 7th rib through cartilage, and the 7th rib then connects to the sternum. So, false ribs have an indirect connection to the sternum. Finally, the 11th and 12th pairs are called floating ribs. Floating ribs are not connected ventrally at all. They end freely in the abdominal muscles. Even though not attached ventrally, they do provide support to the posterior aspect of the trunk. Together, the thoracic vertebrae, the ribs, and the sternum form the rib cage. The rib cage has two very important functions. First, it protects vital organs. Your heart and lungs are enclosed and protected by the rib cage. Second, the rib cage facilitates breathing. During inspiration, the rib cage expands, creating more space for lungs to fill with air. During expiration, it contracts, pushing air out of lungs. The flexible cartilage connections allow this movement. The appendicular skeleton is made of limb bones and the girdles that attach them. Each limb is made of 30 bones. Let's start with the upper limb, your arm. The upper limb has several bones. First, the humerus, the large bone of your upper arm. The humerus articulates at the shoulder joint with the scapula and at the elbow joint with the forearm bones. Second, the radius, the lateral forearm bone on the thumb side. Third, the ulna, the medial forearm bone on the pinky side. The radius and ulna can rotate relative to each other, allowing you to turn your forearm. In the wrist, you have 8 carpal bones. These are small bones arranged in 2 rows. They provide flexibility to your wrist while maintaining strength. In the palm, you have 5 metacarpal bones, one for each digit. These are larger than carpals and align with your fingers and thumb. Finally, the fingers and thumb have phalanges. There are 14 phalanges total, 2 in your thumb and 3 in each of your 4 fingers. Each phalanx is a small bone and together they allow the complex movements of your hand. The lower limb has its own set of bones. The femur is the thigh bone. They see it is the longest bone in your entire body. The femur supports your body weight. It articulates with the pelvis at the hip joint. At the knee, it articulates with the tibia. The tibia, your shin bone, is the larger bone of your lower leg. It is medial lank on the inner side. The fibula is the smaller lateral bone on the outer side. Below the knee, you have the tarsal bones in the ankle and foot. There are 7 tarsal bones including the heel bone and ankle bones. You have 5 metatarsal bones in your foot, similar to the metacarpals in your hand. The toes have phalanges, 14 total, like in your fingers. Big toe has 2 and each of the other 4 toes has 3. One special bone is the patella, your kneecap. It is a cup-shaped bone that covers your knee joint on the front side. It protects the knee joint from injury. Now let's look at how the upper limbs attach to the body. The pectoral girdle or shoulder girdle connects the arms to the axial skeleton. Each shoulder girdle is made of 2 bones. First bone, the clavicle, commonly called the collarbone. Second bone, the scapula, commonly called the shoulder blade. These 2 bones together form one side of the pectoral girdle. You have 2 bones on each side. The scapula is a large, flat, triangular bone. It is located on the back of your thorax between the 2nd and 7th ribs. The scapula has several important features. It has a ridge on the back called the spine. This spine projects outward as a flat, expanded process called the acromion. The acromion forms the bony point of your shoulder that you can feel. The clavicle attaches to this acromion point. Below the acromion, there is a depression called the glenoid cavity. The head of the humerus fits into this cavity, forming the shoulder joint. The glenoid cavity is relatively shallow, which allows a lot of movement but makes the shoulder joint less stable than other joints like the hip. The clavicle is a long, slender bone with an S shape or two curvatures. It is popularly called the collarbone because it sits across the front of your shoulder like a collar. The clavicle connects the shoulder blade to the sternum, stabilizing the whole shoulder complex. The pelvic girdle, the hip girdle, connects the lower limbs to the body. It consists of two coxal bones, one on each side. But here is interesting, each coxal bone is not really one bone originally. Each is formed by the fusion of three separate bones, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. During development, these three bones fuse together. By adulthood, they have completely merged into one single bone. The fusion creates a very strong structure. Where the three bones fuse, there is a large cavity created called the acetabulum. The head of the femur, the thigh bone, fits into this acetabulum, forming the hip joint. The acetabulum is much deeper and stronger compared to the glenoid cavity of the shoulder. This makes sense because the hip joint has to support your body weight during standing, walking, running, all weight-bearing activities. It is designed to be stable and strong. The two coxal bones, the right and left sides meet in front, on the ventral side, forming a joint called the pubic symphysis. This joint is made of fibrous cartilage. The fibrous cartilage is tough but allows limited movement. The pubic symphysis helps distribute and transmit forces throughout the pelvic girdle. During pregnancy, hormones cause the fibrous cartilage to loosen slightly, allowing the pelvis to expand a little for childbirth. Joints are absolutely essential for movement. A joint is any point of contact between two bones or between bone and cartilage. Joints are where bones articulate with each other. When muscles contract, they pull on bones. The bones move around the joints as fulcrums. A fulcrum is the pivot point. In a simple lever, the muscle applies the effort, the bone is the lever arm, and the joint is the fulcrum. Different joints allow different amounts of movement. Some joints allow no movement, some allow limited movement, and some allow a lot of movement. It depends on the structure of the joint. Joints can be classified into three main structural types. First type, fibrous joints. Fibrous joints allow no movement. Second type, cartilaginous joints. These allow limited movement. Third type, synovial joints. These allow considerable movement. The type of joint determines how much movement is possible at that joint. This is a useful classification because it helps you predict how mobile a joint will be just by knowing its structure. Fibrous joints allow zero movement. These joints are completely immobile. The two bones are connected by dense fibrous connective tissue. The best example of fibrous joints is in your skull. The flat bones of the skull are connected to each other by sutures. These sutures are immobile joints. You can see them as lines on the surface of the skull. The bones on either side of a suture are pressed together tightly, creating a rigid connection. The sutures look like irregular seams or lines on your skull. The bones are pressed tightly together. They are bound by collagen fibers from the connective tissue. The edges of the bones have irregular interlocking patterns. Think like puzzle pieces fitting together, which prevents them from sliding apart. This rigid connection creates a unified cranium that protects your brain. The immobility is actually beneficial. It means your brain is securely enclosed in a rigid protective box. Cartilaginous joints are different from fibrous joints. In cartilaginous joints, bones are connected by cartilage, not by fibrous tissue. These joints allow limited movement, more than fibrous joints but less than synovial joints. The best example is the connection between adjacent vertebrae in your vertebral column. Between two vertebrae, there is an intervertebral disc. This disc is made of cartilage. The cartilage allows some bending and movement between the vertebrae. If you add up the small movements at each level, you get significant spinal mobility overall. The intervertebral discs have an interesting structure. The outer part is fibrocartilage, which is tough and provides stability. The inner part is a gel-filled nucleus pulposus. The nucleus acts like a hydraulic cushion, absorbing shocks and distributing forces evenly. This design allows limited bending and rotation between vertebrae while keeping the spine stable and protecting the spinal cord. The clever part is that while each pair of vertebrae moves only slightly, when you add up the movements at all levels, you get a very flexible spine. You can bend forward, backward, side to side. Synovial joints are the most mobile joints. They are characterized by having a cavity a space between the articulating surfaces of the two bones. This cavity is filled with synovial fluid. The synovial fluid is like a lubricant, reducing friction between the bones. The presence of the synovial cavity allows considerable movement. These joints help you walk, run, bend, rotate all your major movements. Synovial joints are found wherever you need a lot of mobility. There are several types of synovial joints, each allowing different types of movement. Ball and socket joints allow movement in multiple directions, like the shoulder joint between humerus and scapula. Hinge joints allow movement in mainly one direction, like the knee joint. Pivot joints allow rotation, like the joint between the atlas and axis in your neck. Gliding joints allow sliding movements, like the joints between wrist bones. Saddle joints, like the thumb joint, allow specific types of movement. Different joints are designed for different functions. Let's talk about disorders of the muscular and skeletal systems. First, myasthenia gravis. This is an autoimmune disorder. What does autoimmune mean? It means the immune system mistakenly attacks the body's own tissues. In myasthenia gravis, the immune system attacks the neuromuscular junction. Remember the connection between motor neuron and muscle? Specifically, it attacks the acetylcholine receptors on the muscle membrane. The antibodies block these receptors, preventing acetylcholine from binding. Without acetylcholine activation, muscles cannot contract properly. Patients experience fatigue, weakness, and in severe cases, paralysis of skeletal muscles. Severe cases can affect breathing. Muscular dystrophy is different from myasthenia gravis. Muscular dystrophy is a genetic disorder, meaning it is due to mutations in genes. These genetic mutations affect proteins in muscles. The most common form is Duchenne muscular dystrophy, due to mutations in the gene for a protein called dystrophin. The mutation causes progressive degeneration of skeletal muscles. The muscles gradually become weak and stop functioning. It is progressive, meaning it gets worse over time, usually starts in childhood, and by adolescence, the person is severely disabled. Unlike myasthenia gravis, which can be treated with immunosuppressive drugs, muscular dystrophy currently has no cure, though research continues. Tetany is a muscle disorder involving involuntary muscle contractions and spasms. What causes tetany? Low calcium. Calcium is essential for normal neuromuscular function. When calcium levels are low, neurons and muscle fibers become overexcited. They start firing spontaneously. This causes involuntary muscle contractions and spasms. These contractions can be very painful. Tetany can be caused by parathyroid gland problems, vitamin D deficiency, or certain medications. Arthritis is inflammation of joints. There are many types of arthritis. One type is gout, which specifically results from accumulation of uric acid crystals. When uric acid builds up in blood and deposits in joints as crystals, it causes severe inflammation and pain. Gout often affects the big toe first. It can be very painful and disabling if untreated. Osteoporosis is an age-related disorder affecting bone. Osteoporosis means the bone becomes less dense, more porous. The bone loses mineral content, becoming brittle and weak. This leads to increased risk of fractures. What causes osteoporosis? A major cause is decreased estrogen levels. Estrogen normally helps maintain bone mineral density. In postmenopausal women, estrogen drops dramatically, leading to accelerated bone loss. Men can get osteoporosis too, especially with advancing age. Risk factors include lack of exercise, inadequate calcium intake, and smoking. Let me summarize the main points we covered in this chapter. First, movement is a fundamental characteristic of all living beings. Different organisms show different forms of movement. You have protoplasmic streaming in unicellular organisms like amoeba. You have ciliary movements in various organisms. You have fin movements in fish, wing movements in birds and insects, and limb movements in land animals. When a movement results in a change of place, we call it locomotion. Locomotion is specifically voluntary movement that moves the organism from one location to another location. Why do animals move and locomote? Multiple reasons. First, they need food, so they move to find it. Second, they need shelter, so they search for safe places to live. Third, during breeding season, they move to find mates. Fourth, they look for appropriate places to breed and raise young. Fifth, they move to find favorable environmental conditions, avoiding harsh climates. Sixth, they escape from predators and enemies. So locomotion is fundamentally about survival and successful reproduction. In the human body, we have three types of movement. Amoeboid movement, seen in white blood cells, involving pseudopodia and streaming of cytoplasm. Ciliary movement, in your trachea and reproductive tract, coordinated beating of cilia. Muscular movement, the most important for locomotion, based on contraction of muscle proteins. Locomotion specifically requires coordinated activity of your muscular system, skeletal system, and nervous system working together. There are three types of muscles in your body. Skeletal muscles appear striated. You can see stripes under the microscope. They are under voluntary control. You consciously command them. They do the locomotory movements. They change your body postures. Visceral muscles or smooth muscles appear smooth, no stripes. They are involuntary. You do not consciously control them. They work automatically. They transport food through your digestive system. They move reproductive cells through your reproductive system. Cardiac muscles appear striated like skeletal muscles, but they are involuntary like smooth muscles. They have a branched structure. These are the muscles of your heart. They beat continuously 24 hours a day, pumping blood. All muscle types, skeletal, visceral, and cardiac, share four important properties. Excitability, the escape. They respond to signals. Contractility, they can contract and shorten, generating force. Extensibility, they can be stretched without being damaged. Elasticity, after being stretched, they return to their original length. These four properties allow muscles to perform their various functions. The muscle fiber is the basic anatomical unit. Inside each muscle fiber, you have myofibrils, many of them, arranged parallel to each other. Each myofibril is divided into units called sarcomeres. The sarcomere is the functional unit, Bifrons. It is the smallest unit that can contract. Each sarcomere is bounded by cell lines. The cell line marks the boundary. The central dark band is the A band, made of thick myosin filaments. On either side are lighter I bands, made of thin actin filaments. This arrangement of A and I bands repeats along the myofibril, creating the striped pattern you see under the microscope. Actin and myosin are polymerized proteins, chains of protein molecules linked together forming the filaments. In resting muscle, a protein called troponin masks the active binding sites for myosin on actin. Another protein, tropomyosin, also blocks access. This masking prevents spontaneous contraction. When the signal comes and calcium binds to troponin, troponin changes shape. This shape change moves tropomyosin out of the way, exposing the myosin binding sites. Now myosin can bind to actin and the contraction cascade can proceed. This regulatory mechanism is elegant. A small conformational change in troponin is transmitted to tropomyosin, exposing the entire binding sites. The process of muscle contraction involves a sequence of coordinated molecular events. A motor neuron carries a signal to the muscle fiber. This signal generates an action potential, a sudden change in electrical potential in the sarcolemma, the muscle membrane. The action potential spreads through the fiber. It triggers the release of calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the sarcoplasm. The elevated calcium binds to troponin. Calcium-troponin binding removes the masking of actin binding sites. Now myosin heads can bind to actin, forming cross bridges. This binding is powered by energy from ATP hydrolysis. The cross bridge formation triggers the power stroke. The myosin head pulls the attached actin filament toward the center of the A band. The Z lines are attached to actins, so they are pulled inward too. The distance between Z lines decreases, the sarcomere shortens. That is contraction. You observe specific changes in the bands during contraction. I bands get narrower because thin filaments overlap more with thick filaments. A bands stay the same width. This is key evidence that the filaments slide rather than shorten. H zone gets smaller as thin filaments slide into this region. The cycle continues. After the power stroke, the myosin head is still attached to actin. The ADP and phosphate are released. New ATP binds to the myosin head. This ATP binding breaks the cross-bridge myosin, releases from actin. The ATP is then hydrolyzed, regenerating the energy in the myosin head. The cycle repeats at the next actin site. This continues as long as calcium remains elevated and ATP is available. To stop contraction, calcium must be removed. Calcium ATP pumps actively pump calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, requiring ATP energy. Loss of calcium from troponin causes tropomyosin to block the binding sites again. New cross bridges cannot form. Existing cross bridges break with ATP binding. The muscle relaxes, returning to rest length. The skeletal system contains 206 bones plus cartilages. It is organized into two main divisions. Axial skeleton, 80 bones providing central support. This includes skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs. Appendicular skeleton, remaining bones plus girdles providing limb support. Bones are specialized connective tissue with hard calcium salt matrix. Cartilage is more flexible with chondroitin-containing matrix. Together, they provide structural framework for movement. Joints are classified into three structural types by their mobility. Fibrous joints allow no movement, exemplified by skull sutures. Cartilaginous joints allow limited movement, exemplified by intervertebral disconnections between vertebrae. Synovial joints allow considerable movement, exemplified by shoulder, knee, and hip joints. Synovial joints have a fluid-filled cavity providing lubrication. Smooth articular cartilage reduces friction. Support structures like ligaments and capsules provide stability. Joints act as fulcrums, allowing muscles to convert their contractile force into mechanical movement of bones. So in summary, what have we learned? Movement and locomotion are fundamental to living organisms. Movement takes many forms: amoeboid, ciliary, muscular. The human body exhibits three types of muscles: skeletal for voluntary movement, visceral for involuntary functions, cardiac for heart. The mechanism of muscle contraction is explained by the sliding filament theory. So, thin filaments slide over thick filaments. The key step enabling contraction is calcium binding to troponin, which removes the mask on actin binding sites. This allows myosin to bind and begin the cycle of cross-bridge formation and filament sliding. The skeletal system consists of 206 bones and cartilages organized into axial and appendicular divisions. Joints connecting bones are of three types based on their mobility. Fibrous joints in skull are immobile. Cartilaginous joints in spine are mobile. Synovial joints in limbs are highly mobile. These joints act as fulcrums for muscles to produce movement. Various disorders can affect the system. Osteoporosis weakens bones, arthritis inflames joints, gout deposits crystals. For normal locomotion and movement, all systems must work together. The nervous system sends signals, muscles generate force, and the skeletal system with its joints transmits this force into coordinated movement. Let me highlight the key concepts you must remember. Movement types. amoeboid, ciliary, muscular, and why animals move. Muscle structure, myofibrils, sarcomeres, filaments, muscle contraction, the molecular cascade. From neural signal through calcium, troponin, tropomyosin, myosin interactions. Skeletal anatomy, bones, cartilages, organization, joint types, and their mobility. Common disorders affecting these systems. To truly understand locomotion and movement, you must think of it as a coordinated system integrating neural signaling, muscle contraction, and skeletal support. All three systems must function properly for normal movement to occur. This systems-based approach will help you understand not just the anatomy, but the physiology and pathology of movement.
Ready to start the day. Me eat, act, and you study way. Uploaded textbook, get summaries in a flash. Practice exams, flashcards, making knowledge last. AI power boost for every ambitious mind. All in seconds, leave the stress behind. In labs here, yeah, you know the